Welcome to Channel Squared, where we connect with you, the divine, and channel here with you live. I'm Heather Marie, founder of Soulgate.
And I'm Jody Lynn Craven, founder of Abundance Consciousness. And today we're talking Ascension, the journey, the joy, the pain. And we're doing this in a two-part episode. And the idea was actually, downloaded through Heather after our crazy 2024 predictions episode. We thought we wanted to dive in to our journey of waking up and what it looked like, because correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but I think the idea of what ascending is supposed to be and the reality of it are very far apart. Do you agree?
Like different planets far.
Yeah.
Like not sisters, not distant cousins, but like long lost relatives you didn't know you had. So I think when this dropped in for me, it was really, or for us, I should say, it was really about stemming from a place of like what happened after our predictions episode. And so, it's funny because like when we were getting ready to go live here, we were talking about how we wanted to talk about this and where we wanted to place this part of the conversation in our conversation. And like right now, I'm just being called to just like put it out there right now. So when after we did this the 2024 predictions episode, the first day I was like, yeah, like rock on, cool, like crazy disclosure, like whatever. And then I went through like several sleepless nights about like my human processing the information that we had put out. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I went through these moments of like, did I do something wrong? Like, is it going to scare people? Did we scare people? And so I really was going through a lot of like the human emotion around processing the information that we just like blurted out. And in that moment, I got, ascension doesn't look the same for everybody. And sometimes ascension comes with massive valleys in addition to those peaks. And I wanted to like start the conversation about what ascension really looks like through our respective lenses, because I think sometimes when people see us talking on this show and even see us in our private practices, where we're coaching our clients and, supporting events and things like this, they tend to look at us like, wow, you guys just have your shit together. And, ascension must have been so great for you. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like as like this idea of like ascension and what that journey actually looks like for us, I think if we disclose how that has actually been, I think that you all watching now are going to be able to see yourselves in our story. So that's kind of where I'd like to go with this. And yeah, so where should we
Yes.
begin?
Well, I want to echo some things before we get started. I want to echo too that, a lot of people, I ourselves included, because I think I can speak for you, Heather. And when I say we look at other people and we're like, wow, they're so perfect. And like, it must be so easy for them. They've just got it figured out. And we put people on a pedestal, and we've noticed that people do that to us too, and think, oh, do you ever have a hard day, or does this ever get to you? And yeah, we're totally human, and that's what the conversation is all about. And the disclosure from last week about the 2024 that we're, you know, headed into, all of that is a part of the ascension. It's a part of waking humanity up. And I think that's how they tie together, because we look at ascension sometimes as this just personal journey and things that we're going through. And yes, and there is the oneness of the whole. We're all one. And the world is transforming, humanity is transforming, humanity is going through this ascension process at the same time. And these things that we channeled last week are because of that, and to assist in that progression of humanity. So I think first question right out the gate, a lot of people think when you're going through the ascension process or the waking up process that there is one moment. So Heather, was it one moment for you and then all of a sudden you were awake?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And it's so true, right? It's like everyone's like, "Oh, when was that moment when everything changed?" And honestly, it it just it always was changing, right? And like when I reflect back on my life and how my life has been, everything that I have experienced, I experienced to like enroll me and train me up for my job today. So, one of the big funny ha-has about Heather is that I've worked everywhere. So when I was a
Ladies and
young
gentlemen,
person,
that is absolute fact. Like there is nothing that this woman has not done.
it's really hilarious. And it's funny because like at first, I'd get really mad because like my family would always call me out on it. But, where are you working this week, Heather? Um, but it is true. I literally have probably done every job under the sun. Maybe not every job, but a lot of different things. And it was just a big funny about how Heather was a job jumper. And I did that for a long time as a young person. And eventually I landed in a career that was more like creative in nature. And that it wasn't spiritual at all. At least I didn't see the spiritual connection then. I was working in beauty and, I helped, you know, uh, women, mostly some men, but mostly women, feel better about themselves through beauty, skin and permanent makeup and things like that. Very creative, artistic even. And I didn't see the healer in me in that role for a long time. I mean, I was in that career for probably 25 years, 24 years before I realized, I've been performing my duties as a healer this entire time. But like backing up to all of those jobs, everywhere in that work, I was interacting and communicating with others, inspiring them, talking to them, hearing how their life is. People naturally open up to me in my presence. And so they just share things like random things that maybe they'd never share with anybody else. They just tell me about them. And as a channel, I would know or somehow get what it is that they needed to hear in order to move through whatever they were going through. I didn't see any of that as a young person. I was just like, blah, 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 blah. And then it would come out and they'd be like, oh, God, you're so wise for such a young person? And and it was bumpy. It was really bumpy because something that I didn't understand about myself is that when I give information or I share, some knowledge bomb that came from the other side without really controlling it, if it wasn't actually like welcomed, it came across as know-it-all.
Mm.
And it would almost like degrade relationships in my life. So as a young person growing up with this, ability to bring this information, not knowing how to control it, not knowing what it is, not even realizing that it's something outside of me, and having my relationships degrade and break down, it was always like I started to create a very tight circle and a very big wall around it because I didn't want to let anybody in. So for
Mhm.
many years, I was very lonely. It's a very lonely place to be.
Mhm.
And so, when I get asked the question of like, what was the moment that you had your awakening? I didn't really have a singular moment. It was like little blips along the way that I didn't actually see until I was like in the space to see it, or like had developed to a point where I could actually reflect and see how everything in my life has been sort of like leading me up to this point. And a lot of those moments came with a lot of pain and a
Mhm.
lot of insecurity and a lot of just pressure and feeling unsupported. Yeah. I mean, it just wasn't this like, oh, I am awakened to the wonderful world of Ascension, like this is going to be my new future. It's never been that. It's never, ever been that. It's always been hard and painful. And, I've had blips of beauty along the way. And when I take the time to see the beauty, which I'll be honest, I didn't do that very much as a younger person. It took me, till I was like 35, 36 years old to realize that, there's a lot of beauty in this world, you know. But when I did start seeing the beautiful things, I could see the beauty in the chaos.
Mhm.
And if I had to pick a moment, it would probably be that, is when I started to see, even though things are a disaster pants everywhere that you look, it's still beautiful in its own way, I guess. Like, what about you? Like, was it a moment for you?
Um, I think it was both. I think I have the same feeling of looking back and seeing, oh, that wasn't like a curveball or like, because I was kind of like you, not, I didn't have as many jobs as you. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I would go from being really, really sure that this was it to no, not it, pivot, go into a different direction. And my family would make fun of me about that too. And until I landed in safety. And I didn't think that safety had anything to do with an ascension journey or spirituality or anything. I didn't think, being in a brokerage business or, financing had anything to do with that either. But then it was, when I started to slow down, because I was go, go, go. And that's when I had hired my first coach. I'd done a bunch of personal development and started learning a little bit more about myself and spirituality. I was hungry for that. Um, but I don't think it was until I slowed down to really start seeing how I had to go from there to here to learn different skills, to acquire different attributes, even frames of mind, seeing the world in different ways and different capacities. But I think that there has been a couple of moments that were definitely defining for me in terms of like the awakening process. I think when I started to really open up my channel and receive information, like I remember that I used to do this in business where I would like sit on my bed and I'd ask myself questions like, why can't I do this? And I'd listen for an answer and I would just get louder and louder and louder. And, I didn't know who I was talking to or, where that other voice was coming from. I just thought it was me. And then later on my spiritual journey, I'd realized, I had started channeling. And so that was a pretty defining moment for me because the information was so wildly different in the nature of like the context of information, but also in the language of the way it was spoken to me, the way that I received the information. So I knew that it was not me, not in this brain capacity, not Jody Lynn Craven. It was not me. It was like unremarkable how different it felt and how that information was delivered. So I think that that was a huge awakening for me to this other side of reality, that beyond the veil, if you will. So that one was a big one for me. And then, this is going to lead into our next question, but for me, when I had my first ectopic pregnancy, I wanted to quit everything. Like nothing mattered in that moment anymore. I'd come so close to death that I was really shaken. And I didn't want anything outside of being a mom, having a family, and I was willing to like torch my entire life. Like, that's it. I'm done. It's over. And that was a defining moment for me. And I can see why now, like looking back, I had to have this moment of clarity, this moment of crazy experience. Like I was driving. What happened was I was driving, I was talking on the phone with my coach while I was driving, and all of a sudden in front of me was my higher self. Like I could see her. She was sitting in this chair and she was hovering over this like red button, like the nuclear explosion button. And I knew that this was like a defining moment in my life. And this was the first time that I had ever seen my higher self in this way or spoken to her. Like I was paralyzed while driving. Talking to somebody on the phone. Thank goodness I had somebody on the phone with me. Like I was just freaked right out. But the message was like, if you're going to quit, like you were meant to do so much more in this lifetime. Your purpose is huge, but if you're going to quit again, and that was the big one for me. If you're going to quit again, like I'm out, I'm not watching this. It's too painful. Like, let me know and I'll turn off the television here. And so that was another defining moment in my ascension journey. But yeah, that
Now,
go
I
ahead.
think it's really interesting how how so different our experiences were. Like mine was like a series of course corrections over and over and over and over and over again, right? And like you did have a couple of big moments that were just like, awakening moments in your ascension process. And I think I want to just like highlight that for, our viewers that, here we are just talking about our experiences and how incredibly different our experience is. So, if you're having a moment of like, what the fuckery is going on, you can just kind of draw on this conversation of like, here's two best friends that have completely wildly different experiences of the ascension process. So please continue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it was both. There was these course corrections for me, and maybe it's because I am really stubborn and they needed to be like hard and hurtful and impactful and really deeply painful experiences,
Mhm.
for me to even like open up my eyes to
Mhm.
how I was living and how I wanted to live and what the truth was. Because I think that's really what Ascension is all about, is challenging all of those things. And I was deeply ingrained in a lot of perceptions that weren't going to get me where I needed to go in this lifetime, weren't going to help me ascend. But I do remember a few cataclysmic events, I guess you could say, that like changed my life completely.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm. Everybody's journey is different. And that's the
So,
interesting thing about ascension, is that one is not better than the other, because I can look at your story and be envious, like, oh man, course corrections, awesome, great. And you could look at me and be like the same thing, man, I wish it would have just been over like that much quicker. um but being able to stand back and see that both journeys have are valid, uh, are incredibly emotional, and took a lot to go through on both sides, and neither one is correct or incorrect. They just
Mhm.
simply happen to be what we needed throughout this journey of our life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but speaking of the journey, I talked about a time that I wanted to like, blow up my life and just quit, pack her in, I'm done. Did you ever feel that way, Heather?
So many times. So many times. And I think that Like there were times in my life when I just wanted to throw in the towel just in general, right? Because I was highly sensitive energetically, like I could feel all of the energy in the room. I know that there were times in my childhood that were particularly painful, dealing with like the family antics and stuff like that that go down sometimes, in the house. And the thing is that even though I've had many moments in my life where I was, longingly looking at the razor blades, um,
Mhm.
there were definitely times in my spiritual journey and practice that I wanted to throw in the towel. And I mean, when I say throw in the towel, not necessarily like suicidal about my spiritual practice, but in times where I was like, what am I doing this for? Like here I am, like putting myself out here, like trying to help ascend humanity so that we can move into a better tomorrow. And I just keep hitting all these roadblocks, and there's just all these problems, and like people aren't listening. And, it's just like this constant whining in my head, right? And there have been times when I'm like, what am I doing all this for? Like, does anybody even freaking care? And there's been times when I've looked at even my own like spiritual practice and my spiritual business that I've just been like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, why am I doing this? And I think that that's a really normal, low vibe place to go.
Yeah.
I think that, sometimes, I'll have a client that will, put me on a pedestal that, I don't know, because I talk to God, it's a big thing. But the, the fact is that sometimes it's like, I can beat my head against the wall trying to give the information that somebody wants and is asking for,
Yeah.
but they do nothing about it. They do nothing with it. They just continue to run the same song and dance. Or, you're putting out the energy, you're trying to help heal, and you're trying to help support, and you're, doing all of the things, and nothing is moving the needle.
Mhm.
And sometimes in those moments, I'll be honest, like I question, like, why did I sign up for this? Like, did I sign up for this? Like, do I even want to do this anymore? Like, I don't know, maybe I should go be like a underwater welder or something. I love to scuba dive, like it's just, it's definitely, part of the ascension, right? It's like a, testing of some kind. And I'm like, why am I being tested? So retarded. It's just ridiculous. Like, why am I being, tested? And so I think that some of those like painful encounters where, you put so much of yourself out there to, uplift and support humanity, to just be punched in the eyeball 5 minutes later, it's just part of the process, right? And in the moment, and you have those human moments where you're just like, F this, I'm not doing it anymore. Piss off, universe. And then you come back to reality and you're like, I'm just kidding. I don't really mean it, But uh but those times are low moments. And I think that they're completely natural. Sometimes people look at this ascension thing as it's just like next step up, next step up, next step up. And it's like, up, plateau. And it's like a staircase. And it's not like that at all. It's a mountain and then a valley, and then maybe you're down in the ditch, and then you're up, and then you're down, and it's, sideways and backwards and forwards, and that's just the fact of it all. It's
Hmm.
just kind of like garbage
Yeah.
sometimes.
Sometimes. Well, I think people look at it like, oh, when I ascend, then I'm just going to go straight up like to
Right.
bliss and joy, and like nothing's ever going to bother me, and like life will be roses and champagne. And I want to echo what you just said. I think that the ascension journey is more like this wave, and I think that we're always traveling in the direction of up, if you will, if
Right.
that's the direction of ascension. Like our
Right.
vibration is moving up, but it doesn't mean that you don't go through those valleys. And for me, I look at those moments as a moment that's breaking me open in the best way possible. Because I was having this conversation with somebody the other day on a different podcast, and he'd asked me, like, why do you think we go through these tough moments? And the only thing that I could really come up with that really makes sense to me is that when you're down in the gutter like that, or in the trenches in the mud, and like things are hard, and that is the only time in my life that I have ever fully surrendered and reflected, like got
Mhm.
on my knees and was like, all right, God, like I'm in your hands. Like, show me what to do. Help me. I can't do this on my own. Like, I give my life to you. How do I move forward? And I don't think I have ever felt that deeply and had that much of an expansion in a moment of bliss.
Mhm.
So I
I
think that
mean,
there's
I
the beauty for you, right?
right, right. And I think that that is like one of the key components in like Ascension, right? Is that when you are having those low moments and you're in that broken open state where you're just raw and real and exposed, it's in those moments that you have the greatest opportunity for your biggest growth.
Mhm.
And,
Your biggest awakening, your biggest
definitely.
realizations. Like,
Hmm.
my biggest realizations have come in those moments of what I perceived as greatest despair. And I don't know about you, Heather, but for me, looking back, I wouldn't change one of them. Not
Yeah.
one thing. And I've been through some heavy shit in my life, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm dropping some questions in the chat. So, y'all feel free to, drop them down because we'd like to have this conversation with you. So now's our opportunity while we're live to, talk this through with you if you would like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely put those comments in there, or questions. If
Yeah.
you have questions about your ascension journey. Um, oh, which way do I want to go with this? Let's talk about relationships. Um, how has going through your ascension journey impacted, if it has, your relationships? You kind of alluded to it earlier.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try not to spend too much time here because I could probably talk for an hour just on relationships and ascension and how that really looks.
Drop
Um,
that in the comments if you want to see an episode on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So, okay. So as I have been going through my ascension, and like I said earlier, I feel like my ascension process began at a very young age and has followed me through my entire life. It wasn't like I was just kind of like bumbling along as a, human, um like part of the reason that I came here was for this ascension process, and I am to do it through communication and bridging the gap between the earth plane and the divine. So like that was my plan, that was my purpose, that's why I'm here. My soul came in for that job, is to bring the divine to the tangible earth plane and build a bridge of communication. And so, as such, I have had a lot of training for this particular job through my entire life.
Mhm.
And what that meant for me in the way of relationships is some of them just burnt to the ground, right? And some of those relationships were incredibly painful to lose. So, as a child, I got picked on a lot. I was like the one that got picked on. And I got picked on because I was small. I got picked on because I was, a know-it-all. Again, uninvited, channeling information comes across as a know-it-all. I just really got kind of like teased and bullied a lot as a child. And then as I entered like, my adolescence, I started, discovering boys and, I got abused quite a bit. because I was so incredibly sensitive to their energy, the energy around me, that I would almost like take on their energy as my own. And so I had almost like some identity crisis. And in that identity crisis, everything falls apart because that's not why I'm here. I'm here to know who I am. Right. And so what happened? I would have course correction. And how did those course corrections come out in romantic partnership? Affairs.
Oh,
Okay. And anybody who has been through that type of betrayal, I know is sympathizing right now with me that it's bullshit, right? It's shitty. It feels awful going through it. And it's heartbreaking. And you start to question, like, why does this keep happening to me? You know, I'm a good person. I give them everything. And then they take that too and they betray me with it. Like it just became this like repetitive cycle. You
mhm,
know, when I was young, I didn't have the awareness to look at it and go, am I creating this in my life? And what am I doing to create this in my life? And if I'm not creating this in my life from my own doing, what is this trying to teach me?
mm.
Ultimately, it was trying to teach me self-worth, right? I learned that later on when I was like 35, that I was to learn. I mean, it took me 35 years of my life to figure out that the lesson I was being taught was self-worth. And had
Wow.
I not learned that lesson, I would not have attracted the relationship I have now,
Yeah.
which is the love of my life. He came here to love me, right? We came here to have this experience together. He
Mhm.
came here for a lot of other reasons. I just like the one that he came here to love me the most. But, the thing is that like previous to, meeting him, I was in a very long-term relationship with a man I cared very deeply about. And, he could not understand who I was on a spiritual level. I was really coming into my channeling abilities and I was getting more and more connected to God and the divine, and I was starting to receive messages very profoundly in very profound ways, and it freaked him out, to be quite frank. It scared him. He thought I was like a witch or Ouija board or something. And so anytime any of my spiritual paraphernalia would come into his experience of his life, he'd see a crystal or a rock or something somewhere, it would freak him out and he would just be like, I don't want that shit out in the house. And it started to become this like pain point in our relationship. And ultimately, in the end, I had to choose what it was that I was going to have as an experience of my life. Was I willing to continue to be uh, in the school of self-worth, learning the lesson of self-worth, let him continue to betray me on that level
Mhm.
while masking who I really am on a soul level
Mhm.
because of my spiritual development and what I wanted and who I am and like what I am becoming? Or do I let the relationship fall away? And in the end, I was the one that had to leave that relationship. And it was incredibly painful. It took me years to leave that relationship. I knew for probably 4 years that that relationship was definitely not for me anymore, that it was a poison in my life. And I stayed thinking I
That's
could fix
crazy.
it, you know, thinking that, you know, like I'm a good person, why would he do these things to me?
Yeah.
You know, But again, it comes back to the ascension lesson of self-worth, right?
Mhm.
And it was really painful. And there were like, his kids were involved. And I loved them like they were my own kids. So I wasn't just walking away from a relationship with him. I was potentially walking away from a relationship with them. The only children that I had had in my life, I was going to walk away from. They weren't my children. I didn't birth them, but I loved them like my children.
Mhm.
And in the end, I lost one The other one I'm still very, very close to.
Yeah.
So as this relationship fell apart and fell away, I dated and I got some lessons in self-worth there, and ultimately I was like, no, I am worthy of having someone in my life who loves me the way that I love them, to have that reciprocated,
Mhm.
right? And and going through this process of like elevating my vibration, I started to notice that my friendships were falling to the side. I had some friendships that were like, they would come to me only when they needed advice.
Mhm.
You know, they started to fall to the wayside. And I started noticing that my circle became incredibly small. So small, in fact, that the only real friends I had in my life was a colleague from work and my parents. Lame, right? And I decided at that time that, I wanted people in my life that were going to respect me, appreciate me, and love me for who I am. And that goes with my spiritualness too, the channel that I am,
Mhm.
right?
All of me.
All of me.
Mhm.
And so I started attracting other friendships that were more high vibrational friendships. Not a lot, a few woo goers. But again, even in those relationships, I find that, I don't hear from them as much. And they only reach out to me when they need something from me or they need advice, right?
Mhm.
They're really coming because they need my channel. And so I know who those friends are, and that's okay, you know?
Yeah.
So when when I think about the children in that previous relationship and then having so much trouble having children in my marriage, again, this pain point, right? Why can't I have kids of my own? Like, why is this so hard for me? I'm a caring, loving, nurturing person. My little wiener dog, dude, like has an awesome life,
Yeah.
right?
He's spoiled.
Totally spoiled, right? Spoiled to the
Yeah.
bones, and I wouldn't have it any other way, you know? But the fact is that like, this is something that like, I will eventually ascend through, but it is a pain point for me. And I know this is a pain point for you. And I want to hear about this relationship stuff for you because I know your story, but I think that you should share it with them, you know? Like it's been incredibly painful going through this. But
Mhm.
I feel like in the place that I am now, I have two besties. I have my amazing husband, who's also a bestie. I've got a wonderful relationship with my mom and dad. I've cultivated a wonderful friendship with my sister, and I feel like that the friends and the family that are in my life today are
Mhm.
here because they love me and accept me for who I am and not who they want me to be.
Mm. Great distinction.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What
Yeah.
about your relationships? Like, have you kind of had that similar story?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think some of the lessons are similar and well, I don't think so. I know so. I think immediately when I thought of the ascension journey and relationships, I thought about friends. But relationships with, my significant other were definitely in there. There's a reason why my last fiance and I did not make it through. We got engaged a month later, we were broken up. Like it happened very quickly and it was very, very painful. But I think for that one in particular, I was really going down the wrong path. And there's nothing wrong with where he was going and where my life would have gone, but that's not why I came here specifically. I was not being authentically me. I had created, a character and I had set up a lot of people in my life to support that role, that character of like the boss babe and, you know, very transactional. I
That's
reflect
a
back.
huge distinction, by the way, because I see that in a lot of people. Like bad bitch boss babe, sort of like persona
Yeah.
that's not even actually them. It's weird. Anyway, please continue.
Well, and I think it's like a societal thing, you know, like you want to take care of yourself and, you know, be strong and all of these things. And I've admitted this before that I didn't have any female friends for a really long time in my life because I didn't like women. I thought they were weak. I thought
That's
that,
awesome.
yeah, I thought they were too sensitive. I wished like this sounds, it has nothing to do with sexuality, but there was many times in my life that I wish that I would have been born a man because I thought things would have been easier if I was born a man.
Yeah.
I like it comes to stamina and like working and I didn't understand like the brain, the physical chemicals within my own body and how they're different from men and like the rest and recovery cycles that women have that differ from men. And I was in a very male dominated place. I mean, there was really only one other woman that was like on our brokerage team or whatever, that was like given her. And at that time when I had first started, and she was in her 50s. So very different hormonally. Also was, you know, had higher testosterone, you know, all of these things. So yeah, so I didn't get along with women for a very, very long time because I had all these preconceived notions, which was really just a reflection of me because I felt that way about me. I felt like I was weaker. I felt like I couldn't control my emotions. I felt like, you know, because I couldn't control my emotions, then I was not as good as a man. Didn't have the stamina. There's all of these perceptions that I had laid upon myself and thought that I had to be all of these other things to be good enough, to have a successful business, to be a leader. And they were all bullshit, but I believed them. And in that relationship, that last relationship, it was all of that stuff coming to a head and realizing like I had changed a whole bunch. I had started to have girlfriends, you know, I had friends, I'd started to learn and observe from other women and appreciate them and learn more about myself and all of that. So that had begun to change. But if I had stayed in that relationship, my life would be wildly different. I wouldn't have opened up to my spiritual abilities. I wouldn't have opened up to the calling of my soul to teach abundance and living an abundant life. I wouldn't even have thought that the way that I live my life today was a possibility. I would have thought that no, that's wrong. You can't do what you want, when you want, how you want, and still have money support you. That just, it wouldn't have been a reality that I would have believed. I had locked myself in this box. And so that had to end very abruptly and very traumatically. It had to, like, the story behind it is just absurd. It happened like, I don't love you anymore. And then, like, on stage the next day, I love her so much. Like, wait a minute, huh? What? Huh? Like, my head was literally spinning. Um,
Yeah.
but it had to be like that, and I had to be broken open again. And I remember, you know, when I was speaking of earlier being broken open, I remember literally not being able to get out of bed and getting on my knees and just saying, God, I don't know. I don't know. Like, please help me. Please help me. All that I want is to feel at peace. And I want to understand why this went so wildly wrong. And I remember, this is just kind of a side note, but I remember in that moment, this feeling of like tranquility washed over me. It was like almost instantaneous after I had asked. And it was like this feeling of tranquility. And then I could see over the next few hours, the next few days, I could see like this movie. And I was in the movie, but I was watching the movie, if that makes sense. And I remember how I perceived that situation, each one of the movie clips. And then I watched what really happened. And I was shocked. Like what I thought wasn't in a lot of ways in terms of my life. And so I could see, it wasn't the path that I was meant to go down. And I don't know what it is. But it really, that moment really drove me towards being happy for me. Like I need to be happy. And when I am happy, I will attract the person that is supposed to be in my life. And I think attracting Nate was exactly what I needed when I needed it. He just really showed me a different side of life, really grounded me. And I needed that. I needed somebody to believe in me and to be open. And what's interesting, you were talking about like how your ex didn't support the spiritual side and the woo and whatever. I had just started that journey. Like I don't know, a minute before Nate came into my life. And I obviously didn't lead with that, like, hey, I'm doing this energy work and whatever, but I would I would talk about it and be like, so this is what I'm learning about me, and this is what I'm learning about energy, and this is what I'm learning about this, and moving energy and whatever. And I could see sometimes that he'd be like, weird, but okay. And he wouldn't say that, but he would be like, oh, okay. And like, cause it was new in the relationship and he just wanted me to be happy and whatever. And because he is that type of man where he's like, whatever makes her happy, I want her to be happy. So I will lift her up and love her no matter what. And so having that person that I really felt had my back changed everything for me. Because as I went
Mhm.
down that spiritual path, I had all of these friends from my former life. I don't know, all of these friends that I had that I don't know really. There's two ways to perceive this, and I don't know which is correct. Maybe neither is correct, and both are correct all at the same time. But I think on one side of things, I was afraid that they would judge me and not understand what I was going through, the revelations that were coming through me, the way that I perceived the world had altered so drastically in a matter of like seconds and months. Like it happened when I go through something very fast. Like very fast, lightning speed. That's just the way that I've always been. And, my family is very similar. Like you make a decision, it's go. Like it just doesn't, that's just who we are. That's just who I am. So the pace that I will move is very quickly. And that's always been an issue in relationships, because if I was in this moment of monumental change, if somebody in my life couldn't figure out where they stood, like where their place was with me, it made them very uncomfortable and they would exit
Mhm.
stage left.
Yeah.
And so that was very hard watching those people leave in my past. So in this moment, after this breakup, and I'm changing so rapidly, and I have this new perception of life and all of that, I really built a wall around myself and started to push people away because, I had this belief that if I cut you out first, then it won't hurt as bad as if you cut me. And so there was that part of the reality. And then there was also the other part of the reality where um they didn't know where they fit in my life. So they didn't fit in with the Jody that I was becoming again, or stepping into, or however you want to call it, and didn't maybe like that. And I had people say that behind my back too. Like, I wish the old Jody would come back. And that was very painful. Um, and in reflecting on it in these moments, I care less about it because I love who I am. And I love the person that I have stepped into. And I was always this person. Like these things that I value and that I cherish about who I am have always been here. And those who know me, like one of my best friends, Anita, who's been my best friend for like 16 years, she always knew that. And that's why it never mattered how much I was changing and how many people thought I was like, oh my gosh, like so much change going on in my life. She knew me. She knew the heart and soul of me. And I think
Mhm.
that's when I reflect on relationships today, I don't have transactional surface level relationships in my life. Not
No,
anymore.
no.
I have deep connections with people who are in my life. I have, a couple of very best friends, and they know me. Like, I don't have to say anything, and they know what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling, and we relate on that level. So it's definitely been an interesting road to walk and reflect upon, and a hard one too. It's never easy losing your best friends or being misunderstood or taken advantage of or any of those things. But I learned a lot of really great lessons, and I wouldn't go back in time and trade, the path that Jody would have been on before versus the
Mm.
path that I am today in this life. I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't go to any other timeline and choose that, because I feel I'm right where I'm supposed to be.
I think you talk about when you were on your spiritual journey, having just met Nate, you were like 5 minutes into your spiritualness, your woo-ness. And then, you meet this man and he is just like, okay, it's weird, but I'm totally down for it. Let's just see what makes her happy, right? That is a really wonderful experience to have. I
Mm-hmm.
was very fortunate that Quinn was already woo when I met him.
Mm-hmm.
His mom is a shaman, a very powerful shaman. He'd been practicing in spirituality for a long, long time. We met at a shaman like workshop. That's how we met. And so I can't tell you what a gift that has been,
Mm-hmm.
because having those types of relationships now are exponentially improving my life. Exponentially. I have my woo man, I have my woo besties. When I like came out of the spiritual closet to my parents, I remember my dad being like, "Okay, this is different. I will listen and see what happens." And maybe he was freaking out inside and just didn't say anything. My mom was very vocal about it, and all she could see, I think, at the time was, "Oh God, my daughter is like hanging out with the Ouija board, right? Like, the devil, it might be in her," right? Like, I think that my mom freaked out way, way more than my dad did. And maybe I'm wrong. Mom, if you're watching, you are welcome to correct me in the chat. Maybe dad completely freaked out, but, it was definitely, a thing in our, in our relationship, but ultimately, deep down, like you said, your friend Anita knows who you are underneath all the bullshit that we put out there for the world to see. Deep down, she knows that you are a kind, loving, amazing soul. And because she's part of your soul family, it was very easy for her to recognize you. And so I think having some of those relationships in your life is a wonderful addition to the experience. But sometimes it takes going through the relationships that are not meant for you in order to find the ones that are meant for you.
Mm-hmm.
I
Nathan
mean,
calls those relationships.
relationships, I like that. We're going to trademark that just for our show,
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, that's right.
um,
Uh,
so, I think that I know that we kind of have to wrap up here, and there's going to be, part two to this next week. We've got a ton of stuff that we want to talk about because I think that this is a conversation that isn't had enough.
mhm.
But when you're looking at the relationships in your life, and maybe this could be homework for you if you want some spiritual homework, is to look at the relationships in your life and take an inventory of, are they here to teach you a lesson? Are you here to teach a lesson? Can you pinpoint what those lessons are if they exist? Or are they here simply to be supportive, like guideposts along the way of your life?
Mhm.
Are they here walking you home?
Mhm. And I wanted to add something too. I think
Mhm.
I've been hearing this a lot lately that authenticity is one of the highest vibrations.
Yeah.
And I think that even though, when your parents looked at you, they might have been like, whoa, because change is scary. And they're like, who
Right.
is this? When
Yeah.
you, and my parents, I mean, they never said that out loud. Actually, they were way more like open and welcoming to it. But I think that they were watching me on like Instagram and social media and like not telling me about it. They were keeping a pulse on what was going on. Um, but I think when you're stepping into that authentic version of you, your light within just illuminates the entire room, the entire world, and people can't help but see that light and appreciate it, even if they don't understand it. And Kat had asked, how is Nate with spiritual stuff now? He's great. Like it's not his thing. He's not gonna start channeling. Um, but that was a great
Oh, come
lesson
on,
too.
Nate.
He channels in different ways. That was a great lesson too, learning from him, like the personal development journey, the journey of ascension doesn't have to look like mine. I was a bookworm and into channeling and then spirituality and listening to podcasts and la la la. And Nate's like, I'm gonna get my hands in the dirt. And the more that I tried to appreciate his journey, the more that it really resonated with me how much he was learning in the way that he was meant to walk down his journey. And so he's still super, super like my number one fan when it comes to all of this. Like, what do you need me to make for your next retreat? He'll do
Yeah.
anything. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um, oh, relationships. Okay.
Hmm.
I think we have to wrap it up. Hey.
Yeah.
Okay. So this will go to a part two. And just to give you a little teaser on what's coming up next, because there's some really juicy questions about Ascension that we have for you next. Like, have you ever been in a place where you thought you had it all figured out, and then just poof, everything is upside down on itself? Yeah, we're gonna get into that. What was the scariest part of Ascension, and did you try to hide? Duh, yes, for me, I did. Have you ever been hijacked? Um,
Oh,
and
man.
one of the things that, we kind of started here, but we're going into it next week. How do you deal with learning the disclosure? Some of the things that you thought were truth are in fact coming out as lies. And for us as channels, as we unveil all of this information, how do we sleep at night with what we've channeled? How do we move through and live this 3D life? So that's all coming up next week, 2 o'clock Mountain, and figure out all the other time zones because I'm really bad at that. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure that you hit that like button and that you are subscribed. We super appreciate you. If you have more questions,